Welcome to the Voice of the Beginning, the Word of the Bible. Before we begin, help us spread the word. Subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share with those you love.
The story of Solomon's temple is, at its deepest core, the saga of human yearning for the presence of God. It is a narrative of an ardent desire that transcends architecture and material splendor. It all began in the heart of one man, King David. David, the poet-warrior, the founder of a stable kingdom, would look at his luxurious cedar palace and feel a profound and holy discomfort. He could not tolerate that the Ark of the Covenant, the earthly dwelling place of the living God, the very throne of the Creator, resided in a temporary tent, while he enjoyed lavish comfort. This spiritual restlessness is the first and most powerful teaching. Living faith demands that we seek the best, the most worthy, and the most permanent for that which is divine in our lives. It is proof that genuine worship manifests itself in acts of deep devotion. David, however, in an act of supreme humility and submission to the divine will, understood that the final construction would not be his to accomplish. His hands, marked by the sword and long wars, were not the most suitable for raising the house of peace. He would be the preparer, the dreamer, the accumulator of resources. He dedicated himself with fervor to gather fabulous amounts of gold, silver, bronze, and timber, devoting his energy and wealth not to his own monument, but to the glory of the Most High. His was the initial sacrifice and the preparation of the soul and the matter, so that the holiness of the work could be built by his son, Solomon, in times of tranquility and grace. This inaugural stage is a powerful metaphor for our own spiritual journey. It teaches us that every great work, every inner transformation, begins with the recognition of our limitation and the humble acceptance that the execution of the perfect work belongs to a greater power. David shows us the path of perseverance. Even if we are not the ones who see the project completed, we are called to prepare the ground to purify our intentions and to gather the best we have, our time, our talent, and our devotion, as a spiritual legacy. The building of the temple thus begins long before the first stone is laid, in the ardent desire of a pure heart that yearns to create a worthy dwelling for its Creator, making preparation the first and essential act of worship. With the transition of power, the responsibility of raising the house of the Lord fell upon the shoulders of the young King Solomon. However, what immortalized this king was not the crown he inherited, but the choice he made. Before God, Solomon did not ask for earthly conquests, long life, or the destruction of his enemies. His request was singular and profound: wisdom to judge and discern his people. This primacy of wisdom is the unshakable spiritual foundation of the entire construction. The temple was not erected by brute force or wealth, but by intelligence and deep reverence. Solomon utilized the noblest resources in his kingdom, uniting the artistry, engineering, and dedication of Israel with the technical skill of the Phoenicians of Tyre, a testament to the joining of diverse talents for a sacred purpose. The chronicles and legends surrounding this construction, speaking of mythical tools and revealed secrets, only emphasize the almost supernatural dimension of the undertaking. Nevertheless, the greatest architectural mystery is also the most profound spiritual teaching. For 7 years, while the magnificent structure was taking shape, the scriptures state that no sound of a hammer, chisel, or iron tool was heard at the sacred site of Mount Moriah. The stones, from the foundations to the very top, were perfectly hewn, shaped, and adjusted in distant quarries, transported and placed in their final positions with silent precision. This is a powerful symbol for our life of faith. It reveals that true inner edification, the construction of our character and our spirituality, must be a process carried out in the silence of contemplation, far from the deafening noise of worldly distractions, vanity, and self-promotion. The work of God within us is built in peace, serenity, and discretion. It is divine wisdom that designs and adjusts every piece of our lives, ensuring that the temple we are harmonizes perfectly. Only wisdom, the foundation chosen by Solomon, is capable of resisting the centuries and maintaining the integrity of our faith, making us a dwelling place worthy of the glory that would come to fill it. The architecture of Solomon's temple was not merely functional, it was the very metaphor of sanctification, a three-dimensional map of the soul's ascent toward the divine. It invited the worshiper on a physical journey that mirrored a profound spiritual one. The first level was the outer court atrio externo, accessible to all people, which represented the world, our common life, the body, where the profane mingled with the sacred in preparation for worship. Upon advancing, the priest entered the holy place Lugar Santo, the area of continuous service, which symbolized the soul, the intellect, and the active practice of faith. Here the objects were crucial. The candelabrum menorah was not just light but the representation of the light of the word and enlightened consciousness which dissipates the darkness of ignorance. The altar of incense was the symbol of our prayers, which must be constant and pleasing, ascending like a perfumed smoke to heaven. Finally, separated by a thick and imposing veil, lay the Holy of Holies, Santo dos Santos, the Debir, the most holy place, accessible only once a year by the high priest. This space represented the pinnacle, the human spirit in union with the eternal spirit, the ultimate intimacy and the direct point of contact between the creation and the Creator. The purpose of the entire structure was to lead the ark, the center of the covenant, to this place of absolute sacredness. The climax of all human effort came at the dedication of the temple. When Solomon prostrated himself in prayer, God's answer came not in words, but in power. The glory of God, the Shekinah, descended as a visible and dense cloud, filling the temple in such a way that the priests could not even stand to minister. This manifestation is a transcendent teaching. It proves that the ultimate purpose of our life is not merit, ritual, or human effort, but to be the receptacle of the divine glory. When our soul, body, and spirit, the three levels of the temple, are prepared and dedicated to holiness, the presence of the Most High floods us, surpassing all merit, all ability, or effort. The Shekinah shows us that the high point of faith is when our presence yields to the ineffable majesty of the Creator. If the temple was the body, the Ark of the Covenant was its pulsing heart, the very reason for its existence. It was not merely a ritualistic object, it was the visible throne of the invisible God, the focal point where heaven met earth, guarded beneath the wings of the cherubim, above the mercy seat. The mystery of the Ark resides in its contents. It housed the three fundamental elements that define God's relationship with humanity. First, the tablets of the law, the sacred code inscribed by the finger of the Eternal, representing the moral direction and the non-negotiable divine standard for a righteous life. Next, the jar of manna, the miraculous food that sustained the people in the wilderness, symbolizing continuous provision, the total dependence on the sustenance that descends from heaven for our soul. Finally, Aaron's rod that budded, the sign of priestly authority and divine election, showing that true leadership is not by force or ambition, but by confirmed anointing and grace. The ark represented the living covenant. However, tragedy struck. With the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonian forces, the ark vanished from history. Its disappearance is one of the greatest and most debated mysteries of humanity, fueling legends that located everywhere from secret tunnels beneath Jerusalem to ancient churches in Ethiopia. Spiritually, its disappearance is the most transformative teaching. The Eternal allowed the temple to be destroyed and the most sacred object to vanish, forcing his people to a profound realization: the covenant and the presence cannot be contained in wood and gold. They are not limited to a box or a physical structure. The relentless pursuit of the exterior ark is, in reality, an invitation to inner seeking. It impels us to search for the law of God written in our hearts, to live by the spiritual provision that never ceases, and to exercise the authority of faith wherever we may be. The ark teaches us that the divine presence is now a matter of intimacy and fidelity, not geographical location. Unfortunately, the history of Solomon's temple is a narrative of glory, followed by profound fragility and warning. The temple, a symbol of faithfulness, did not prove immune to human failure. The paradox began with the builder himself. Despite his unparalleled wisdom, Solomon allowed the lust for power and the influence of his many foreign wives to introduce idolatry into the heart of Jerusalem, defiling the original purpose of holiness. The people, over time and by habit, committed the fatal error of transferring their faith from the essence to the form. They began to rely on the mere edifice, the splendor of the gold, the empty repetition of ritual, and routine sacrifices, neglecting the real pillars of the covenant: obedience, social justice, and moral integrity. In the face of this growing hypocrisy, the voice of God manifested through the prophets' figures like Jeremiah and Ezekiel. They raised a dramatic lament and an incisive warning. The temple was neither a magic talisman nor a protective amulet against the consequences of poor choices. God was not confined to concrete, cedar, or gold. On the contrary, he warned that unfaithfulness and the oppression of the poor would empty the blessing of the place, transforming the house of prayer into a den of robbers, a refuge for those who practiced evil, trusting that the physical structure would save them from judgment. This historical phase confronts us with an uncomfortable yet vital truth. Material ostentation and external religiosity are useless without inner transformation and moral integrity. The splendor of the temple became a painful reflection of the spiritual coldness and unfaithfulness of the people surrounding it. The judgment that followed, the threat of destruction, was not an act of divine vengeance, but a painful and profoundly necessary correction, a radical stripping away with the ultimate purpose of forcing the people to remember that true holiness resides in character, in the commitment of the heart, and in the practice of justice, and not merely in concrete and empty ceremonies. The culmination of this painful spiritual correction manifested itself in physical destruction. History records not just one, but two cataclysmic annihilations. First, the relentless fury of Nebuchadnezzar in the 6th century BC, which led to the fall of Solomon's first temple, resulting in the Babylonian exile. Centuries later, came the final tragedy, the total annihilation of the Second Temple by the Roman armies under Titus. In the year 70 AD, the fire, the plunder, and the desecration of the most holy place were events of unparalleled trauma. seeming to break the spiritual backbone of a people whose faith had been for centuries umbilically linked to that sacred mountain. The smoke ascended to the heavens, no longer as the incense of worship, but as a testimony to the fragility of human constructions. However, it is at this moment of ruin that one of the greatest spiritual lessons in history is revealed. The destruction of the physical temple drove faith toward a radical metamorphosis. The people, forced to live dispersed, far from the central place of sacrifices, were compelled to discover that the presence of God could be accessed anywhere. The temple was no longer in Jerusalem. It became portable, residing in communal prayer, the study of the Word, and the synagogue which could be established wherever 10 faithful men gathered. The forced loss of the physical form taught the great truth. The Creator is infinitely greater than any building. He cannot be imprisoned by walls of cedar or gold. What remained, the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, is not just a monument to mourning. It is a powerful symbol of perseverance, a material anchor that attests to the unshakable hope and the certainty of the promise of reconstruction. The lament before those ancient stones is also a prayer for the mending of what is broken within us. This phase of history assures us that, even amidst the collapse of everything physical and tangible in our lives, the essence of faith survives and, in fact, deepens and strengthens, because it is carried within, to the Holy of Holies of our spirit. The millennial mystery of Solomon's Temple, with all its glory and its subsequent ruins, finds its eternal resolution and its full meaning in the New Covenant. Centuries after the destruction of the first temple, and shortly before the final fall of the second, the Messiah himself, Jesus of Nazareth, stood before that imposing structure of marble and gold and uttered a disconcerting prophecy. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. The crowd thought of Herod's building, but the glorious revelation was that he spoke of the temple of his own body. His death on the cross was not an end, but an act of eternal access. At the exact moment of his last breath, the veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies in the Jerusalem temple was torn from top to bottom. Symbolically, the path to the intimate presence of God was opened, instantly and forever, to all who believe. This revelation revolutionized faith. The temple was no longer a geographical point, nor a structure limited by rules of access. The temple ceased to be a place to become a person, and from him, the dwelling place of the Holy Spirit expanded. The Apostle Paul captured this essential truth and delivered it to humanity as the greatest of legacies. Do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? The legacy of Solomon's temple then becomes our most sacred calling. We are now the divine architecture, living, walking, and unshakable temples, sustained not by foundations of stone, but by the power of the Spirit. The task of faith is no longer to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, but to build and maintain holiness within our own selves. Solomon's wisdom must be the firm foundation of our character. Prayer must be our constant incense that ascends without ceasing. And unconditional love must be our new ark of the covenant, guarding the law in our heart. The great task of the spiritual life is to build, guard, and sanctify this most important temple of all, our own being. The eternal dwelling place of the divine, a living testimony to the presence that, finally, has no more walls to contain it.
May this word take root in your spirit and guide your steps. If this message spoke to you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.